The whispers cut through the reunion like glass. "Poor Sophia," I heard my cousin Miranda say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Bringing that odd child here, as if anyone wanted a reminder." My heart shattered as I watched my 12-year-old daughter Elena's shoulders slump. She'd heard it too, just 3 steps into my grandfather's ancestral home, and already I regretted coming. But then Elena's hand slipped into her pocket, touching the worn edges of Grandpa Marcus's final letter, the one he'd made her promise not to open until the moment when the family shows its true colors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never planned to attend the Morrison family centennial. The invitation arrived in March, a heavy cream envelope embossed with the family crest that had decorated our dinner plates and hand towels for generations. I'd left it unopened on my kitchen counter for weeks, using it as a coaster for my morning coffee until the ring stains made it impossible to ignore. It wasn't until Elena discovered it while searching for her math worksheet that I was forced to acknowledge its existence. "What's this, Mom?" she asked, her dark eyes curious as she studied the elaborate calligraphy. Even at 12, Elena had a talent for noticing things others tried to hide. "Morrison family centennial," she read slowly. 100 years of legacy. Are we going?" I busied myself with wiping down the counter, avoiding her gaze. "Probably not, sweetheart. I have that. Big deadline at work, and you have your science camp." Elena's expression fell slightly. "But it says here it's at Great-Grandpa Marcus's estate. You always told me stories about that house with the secret passageways and the library with the hidden door." Just hearing my grandfather's name sent a flood of memories washing over me. Summer afternoons reading in the window seat of his study, the smell of pipe tobacco and old books, his deep laugh that seemed to rumble up from the earth itself. He had been gone for 5 years now, but sometimes I could still hear his voice in my head, especially when I felt lost. "Besides," Elena continued, her voice smaller now, "I've never met most of the family. Just Aunt Joanna and Uncle Peter when they visited last Christmas." "That's because most of them aren't worth meeting," I thought bitterly. But I couldn't say that to Elena. She didn't know about the whispers that had followed me since I was 18, when I'd walked away from the prestigious Morrison Legacy Scholarship to pursue art instead of law or medicine like every Morrison for 4 generations. She didn't know how they'd reacted when I'd returned 6 years later as a single mother, refusing to name Elena's father or explain his absence. "They aren't very nice people," I said instead, instantly regretting my words as confusion flashed across her face. "But they're family," she replied, as if that explained everything. In Elena's world, family meant love and acceptance. She had no concept of the complicated web of expectations, judgments, and old wounds that made up the Morrison clan. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Aunt Joanna, the only family member who had stood by me through everything. "Have you received the invitation? Please come, Olivia." It's what Marcus would have wanted. Besides, I have something for Elena from him. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. My grandfather had left something for Elena? We'd visited him regularly until his health declined, and Elena had adored him, but I had no idea he'd set something aside specifically for her. "Who is it?" Elena asked, peering over my shoulder. "Aunt Joanna," I replied. "She says Great-Grandpa Marcus left something for you." Elena's eyes widened. "For me? Really? Oh, Mom, we have to go now, please." I looked at my daughter. Her hopeful expression, the way she twisted her favorite silver bracelet around her wrist when she was excited, a habit she'd had since she was small. I thought about all the stories I'd told her about the Morrison estate, the family history I'd shared selectively, keeping the darker parts hidden away. Perhaps it was time for her to see it all for herself. Maybe, just maybe, things would be different now. "All right," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll go to the reunion." Elena's face broke into a wide grin, and she threw her arms around me. "Thank you, Mom. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait to meet everyone and see Great-Grandpa's house and find out what he left for me." Her enthusiasm was contagious, but a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The Morrisons had always been masters at presenting a perfect facade to the world, successful, dignified, untouchable. But behind closed doors, they wielded judgment like a weapon, and I still carried the scars. The weeks leading up to the reunion passed quickly, filled with preparations and Elena's endless questions about the family. I found myself sharing more stories, carefully curated ones about holiday dinners and summer picnics, omitting the cutting remarks and cold silences that had punctuated many of those gatherings. 3 days before we were set to leave, Aunt Joanna called. Her voice sounded older than I remembered, frailer somehow, but still warm with the kindness that had been my lifeline years ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Olivia, dear, I'm so glad you're coming," she said. "There's something you should know. I found a letter in Marcus's desk after the will was read. It's addressed to Elena, with strict instructions that she's only to open it during the reunion, at what he called the moment when the family shows its true colors." A chill ran down my spine. "What does that mean? What's in the letter?" "I don't know," Joanna replied. "It's sealed, and you know how Marcus was about his privacy, but whatever it is, he thought it was important enough to plan even from beyond the grave." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. My grandfather had been a complicated man, stern and traditional in many ways, but also surprisingly progressive in others. He'd been disappointed when I turned down the legacy scholarship, but he'd never cut me off like the rest of the family. And when I'd returned with Elena, he'd welcomed us both without questions. What could he possibly have written to Elena? And why did it need to be opened at the reunion, at some cryptic moment only Elena would recognize? The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect June day that belongs in a painting. Elena was up before me, already dressed in the outfit she'd picked out weeks ago, a yellow sundress with tiny embroidered flowers along the hem, white sandals, and a light blue cardigan. She'd pulled her dark curls back with a silver headband, and as she spun around to show me, my throat tightened with emotion. "You look beautiful, sweet pea," I said, smoothing a stray curl behind her ear. "Do you think they'll like me?" she asked suddenly, vulnerability flashing across her face. The question caught me off guard. Elena had always been confident, marching to the beat of her own drum without caring what others thought. It was one of the things I admired most about her. But now I saw something else, a desire to belong, to be accepted by this family she'd heard so much about but barely knew. "They'd be fools not to," I replied, meaning every word. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. Before I could say more, the doorbell rang. Aunt Joanna, arriving to ride with us to the estate. "Oh my," she exclaimed when she saw Elena. "Don't you look lovely? The spitting image of your mother at your age." She handed Elena a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is from your great-grandfather. Remember what I told you about when to open it?" Elena took the package reverently, turning it over in her hands. "The moment when the family shows its true colors," she repeated. "But how will I know when that is?" Joanna's smile turned sad around the edges. "Trust me, dear, you'll know." The drive to the Morrison estate took nearly 2 hours, winding through rolling countryside that grew more exclusive with each passing mile. Elena pressed her face to the window as we turned onto Oakwood Lane, gasping at the grand homes set back from the road. "Which one is it?" she asked excitedly. "Which one is Great-Grandpa's?" You can't see it from the road, I explained. It's set back behind those trees. As we turned onto the long, curved driveway, the Morrison estate came into view. A sprawling Victorian mansion with a wide wraparound porch, multiple chimneys, and a circular tower at one corner. The morning sun glinted off the many windows, and perfectly manicured gardens surrounded the property in a riot of summer colors. Elena's eyes widened. "It's like a castle," she whispered. "Your great-grandfather's grandfather built it in 1923, Aunt Joanna explained. With timber fortune money. It's been in the family ever since. I hadn't seen the house in nearly 6 years, not since my grandfather's funeral. It looked exactly the same, frozen in time like the traditions and expectations of the family it housed. As we pulled into the already crowded parking area, I spotted familiar cars: Uncle Richard's sleek black Mercedes, Cousin Philip's vintage Jaguar, the matching BMWs belonging to the twins, Miranda and Melanie. "Deep breaths, Aunt," Joanna murmured, patting my hand. "Remember why we're here." I nodded, glancing back at Elena, who was gathering her small backpack. Inside was Great-Grandpa Marcus's mysterious letter, which she had insisted on carrying herself. Her face was alight with excitement, completely unaware of the tension that had my shoulders hunched nearly to my ears. "Ready?" I asked her, forcing a smile. She nodded eagerly, practically bouncing in her seat. "Ready." As we approached the grand front entrance, I could hear the buzz of voices and laughter spilling out onto the porch. A banner hung above the door reading, "Morrison Family Centennial, 1923 to 2023, with the family crest emblazoned in gold." Elena paused to admire it, tracing the intricate design with her eyes. "That's our family crest?" she asked. "With the oak tree and the 3 stars?" "Yes," I replied. "The oak represents strength and endurance. The stars are for wisdom, ambition, and loyalty." "What's the Latin part mean?" "Fortitudine et honore," I translated. "With courage and honor." Elena's face took on a solemn expression as she committed this to memory. "I like that," she said finally. We stepped through the doorway into the grand foyer, where a young woman I didn't recognize was checking names off a list. "Welcome to the Morrison Centennial," she said cheerfully. "Names, please." "Olivia Morrison," I replied. "And my daughter, Elena. We're with Joanna Morrison." The young woman's eyes widened slightly in recognition, and she checked our names with a little more attention than necessary. "Of course," she said, her tone shifting subtly. "You're Marcus's granddaughter." The artist. The way she said artist, like it was a polite euphemism for something distasteful, told me everything I needed to know about how the family narrative around me had been maintained in my absence. "That's right," I replied coolly. "And this is Elena, his great-granddaughter." Elena, oblivious to the undercurrent, smiled brightly at the woman. "It's nice to meet you. Is there going to be a tour? Mom says there are secret passageways in the house." Before the woman could respond, a familiar voice cut through the foyer. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence." Miranda Morrison, my cousin, descended the grand staircase like she owned the place, which, as the eldest daughter of my Uncle Richard, she practically did since my grandfather's death. Her blonde hair was twisted into an elegant updo, her cream linen dress probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her smile was as sharp as broken glass. "Olivia," she said, air kissing somewhere near my cheek. "It's been ages, and this must be." Her gaze dropped to Elena, taking in everything from her simple sundress to her worn backpack. "This is my daughter, Elena," I said, placing a protective hand on Elena's shoulder. "Elena, this is your cousin Miranda." "Second cousin." "Technically," Miranda corrected with a brittle laugh. Then, in a stage whisper meant to be overheard, "Poor Sophia, bringing that odd child here, as if anyone wanted a reminder." I felt Elena stiffen beside me, and rage surged through my body. Before I could respond, Aunt Joanna stepped between us, her small frame somehow filling the space with dignified authority. "Miranda," she said calmly, "perhaps you could show us where the refreshments are being served. Elena has been looking forward to seeing the garden terrace." Miranda's smile never faltered. "Of course, Aunt Joanna. Follow me. Everyone's out back." As we followed Miranda through the house, I leaned down to whisper in Elena's ear. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her earlier excitement had dimmed. Her hand slipped into her pocket, and I knew she was touching the letter from her great-grandfather, perhaps wondering if now was the moment he had mentioned. I squeezed her shoulder gently. "Remember what I said this morning. You are more than enough." The garden terrace was packed with Morrisons of all ages. Tables draped in white linen held elaborate floral arrangements and silver trays of appetizers. A string quartet played classical music in one corner, and waitstaff in black and white circulated with champagne and sparkling cider. It was exactly the kind of elegant, tasteful gathering my family was known for. As we stepped outside, heads turned. Conversations paused. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes assessing us, judging us, finding us wanting. Elena moved closer to my side, suddenly shy in the face of so many strangers wearing our family features. "Olivia." My Uncle Peter broke away from a group and approached us, his smile genuine unlike his daughter Miranda's. "And this must be Elena. My goodness, she has the Morrison eyes, doesn't she?" It was true. Elena had inherited the distinctive deep blue, eyes that appeared in every generation of Morrisons, though hers were framed by thick, dark lashes rather than the family's typical blonde. "It's wonderful to meet you, Elena," Uncle Peter continued, crouching slightly to offer his hand. "I'm your great-uncle Peter. I visited you a few Christmases ago, but you were much smaller then." Elena shook his hand solemnly. "I remember. You brought me a kaleidoscope that made star patterns." Uncle Peter looked pleased. "That's right. You have a good memory." "She remembers everything," I said, relaxing slightly in the presence of one of the few family members who had never treated me with disdain. "It's sometimes terrifying." As Uncle Peter laughed, I caught sight of my Uncle Richard watching us from across the terrace, his expression unreadable. As the current patriarch of the Morrison family since my grandfather's death, his opinion carried the most weight. He caught my eye, nodded curtly, and turned back to his conversation, dismissing us without a word. "Don't mind Richard, Auntie I," Joanna murmured. "He's been in a mood all morning. Something about the family trust." Over the next hour, we made our way around the terrace, introducing Elena to relatives she'd never met. Some were polite but distant, others openly curious about this child who had been kept away from family gatherings for so long. The younger cousins invited Elena to join them for croquet on the lawn, and after a questioning glance at me, she went, her natural sociability reasserting itself. I watched her from a distance, sipping a glass of champagne that didn't quite mask the bitter taste in my mouth. She was trying so hard, answering questions politely, laughing at the right moments, standing straight with her shoulders back the way I'd taught her. But I could see the confusion in her eyes each time a conversation stopped abruptly when she approached, or when an adult's smile didn't quite reach their eyes. "She's a lovely girl," came a voice beside me. I turned to find my Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, studying Elena with a thoughtful expression. Poised. Intelligent. "You've done well with her, Olivia." The unexpected compliment caught me off guard. "Thank you," I managed. "It can't have been easy," she continued, "raising her on your own, especially after the way the family reacted." I tensed, waiting for the judgment that usually followed such observations, about my irresponsibility, my poor choices, my failure to uphold the Morrison name. Instead, Catherine sighed. "I always thought they were too hard on you, both when you declined the scholarship and when you came back with Elena. Marcus thought so too." I looked at her in surprise. He did? Catherine nodded. Oh, yes. He and Richard had quite the argument about it after you left that Easter dinner. I've never seen Marcus so angry. I had no memory of this. All I remembered from that disastrous Easter 6 years ago was the cutting remarks, the pointed questions about Elena's father, and finally, my tearful departure with a toddler in tow, vowing never to return. I didn't know, I said quietly. Marcus was old-fashioned in many ways, Catherine replied, but he believed in standing by family no matter what. He was proud of you, Olivia, for making your own way, for raising such a remarkable child. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away quickly. I wish I'd known that. I believe you will, Catherine said cryptically, glancing toward Elena, who was now engaged in an intense croquet match with her cousins. Marcus always had a way of making his feelings known, even when he wasn't physically present. Before, I could ask what she meant. A bell rang from inside the house, signaling that lunch was about to be served. Catherine squeezed my arm gently and moved away to join her husband. The formal dining room of the Morrison estate could seat 40 people comfortably, and today every chair was filled. Elena and I were seated near the middle of the long table, with Aunt Joanna on my other side and some cousins I barely remembered. Across from us, Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table, in what had once been my grandfather's place, with Miranda to his right. Elena leaned close to whisper, "This is just like in the movies, Mom. Look at all the forks." I smiled at her enthusiasm, grateful that despite the undercurrents of tension, she was still finding joy in the experience. "Start from the outside and work your way in," I whispered back, recalling the etiquette lessons my grandmother had drilled into me as a child. As the first course was served, a delicate watercress soup that had been a Morrison tradition for generations, Uncle Richard stood to give a toast. He cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly groomed, the heavy Morrison signet ring glinting on his right hand. "Welcome, family," he began, raising his glass. "Today, we celebrate a century of the Morrison legacy. 100 years since my grandfather built this house as a testament to what hard work, intelligence, and proper values can achieve." Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. The Morrison name has stood for excellence for 5 generations. We have produced judges, senators, surgeons, and business leaders. Our family's contributions to this country and our community are immeasurable. I could feel the weight of tradition pressing down, suffocating in its intensity. This was exactly what I had fled all those years ago. The crushing expectations, the narrow definition of success, the unspoken requirement that personal happiness must be sacrificed on the altar of family prestige. As we begin our second century, Richard continued, I look around this table and see the next generation ready to carry our legacy forward. His gaze moved deliberately around the table, lingering on the young adults, and conspicuously skipping over Elena and me. "To the Morrison legacy," he concluded, raising his glass higher. "May it continue to thrive for another 100 years with courage and honor." "Courage and honor," the family repeated in unison, drinking to the toast. Beside me, Elena took a small sip of her sparkling cider, her expression thoughtful. I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed the implications of being so deliberately excluded from Richard's vision of the family future. The lunch proceeded. Through multiple courses, each one served with the precision and formality that characterized Morrison gatherings. The conversation flowed around us, focused largely on family achievements, Philip's recent appointment to a prestigious medical board, the twins' successful investment firm, young Thomas's acceptance to Harvard at 17. When the inevitable questions finally turned to us, they were directed at me with carefully constructed politeness. "And what are you doing these days, Olivia?" asked a distant cousin whose name I couldn't quite remember. "Still with the art thing?" I forced a smile. "Yes, the art thing is going quite well, actually. I have a studio downtown and gallery representation in 3 cities. My most recent exhibition sold out. How creative, she replied, in a tone that suggested creativity ranked somewhere below a communicable disease on her list of desirable traits. Mom's amazing, Elena piped up, loyalty flashing in her eyes. She just got commissioned to create a sculpture for the new library. They picked her design out of like hundreds of submissions. The cousin's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that so? It is, Aunt Joanna confirmed, pride evident in her voice. Olivia's developed quite a reputation in the contemporary art world. Marcus always said she had exceptional talent. A brief, uncomfortable silence followed the mention of my grandfather. It was broken by Miranda, who asked with exaggerated curiosity. And what about school, Elena? What subjects do you enjoy? Elena brightened at being directly addressed. I love science and art the most. I'm in the advanced math program, and I won the regional science fair with my project on bioluminescent bacteria. Bioluminescent bacteria? Miranda's husband repeated, looking equal parts impressed and repulsed. What an unusual interest for a young girl. It's not unusual at all, Elena replied matter-of-factly. Lots of kids are interested in science. My best friend Zoe and I are going to science camp this summer to learn about marine biology. Miranda's smile thinned. Well, isn't that nice? The Morrison women have traditionally focused on more refined pursuits, art history, literature, music. Though I suppose we're seeing how traditions change. Her gaze flicked meaningfully. Toward me. I play piano too, Elena offered, and I'm learning about art history from Mom. She lets me help in her studio sometimes. Perhaps after lunch, Aunt Joanna interjected smoothly. Elena might play something for us. The piano in the music room was just tuned last week. Elena looked at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded encouragingly, though anxiety twisted in my stomach. The Morrisons had always placed enormous value on musical accomplishment, and the thought of Elena being judged by their exacting standards made me nervous. After the dessert, my grandmother's famous lemon tart, was cleared away, the family moved to the music room. This had always been my favorite room in the house, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, the delicate frescoes on the ceiling, and at its center, the magnificent Steinway grand piano that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Elena approached the piano with reverence, running her fingers lightly over the polished ebony surface before settling on the bench. She adjusted her position, took a deep breath, and began to play. I recognized the piece immediately, Debussy's Clair de Lune, a challenging choice for a 12-year-old. She played with technical precision, but more importantly, with genuine feeling, her small hands moving confidently across the keys, her body swaying slightly with the melody. The room fell silent, all conversation ceasing as the beautiful, dreamlike music filled the space. I watched the faces of my relatives, seeing surprise, approval, and in some cases, a reluctant reassessment of their preconceptions. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of perfect stillness before the applause began. Elena smiled, a flush of pleasure coloring her cheeks as she took a small bow. That was lovely, dear, said my Aunt Elizabeth, who had taught piano for decades at the conservatory. You have a natural sensitivity to Debussy. How long have you been playing? Since I was 6, Elena replied. My mom found an old upright piano at a garage sale and fixed it up for me. I saw several eyebrows raise at this revelation. The idea that a Morrison child would learn on a second-hand piano, rather than a proper instrument, was clearly shocking to some. Well, you've done remarkably well with limited resources, Elizabeth said, with a pointed glance in my direction. Before I could respond, Uncle Richard stepped forward. Yes, quite impressive for a child with unconventional training. He placed a heavy hand on Elena's shoulder. You have the Morrison musical ear, certainly. It's a shame you haven't had the advantages the family could have provided. The implication was clear. If I had stayed within the family fold, if I had conformed to their expectations, Elena would have had access to the finest teachers, the best instruments, the Morrison network of connections and opportunities. Elena looked up at him, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. My mom gave me the best advantage of all, she said clearly. She taught me to love music for itself, not for how it looks to other people. A hush fell over the music room as Elena's words hung in the air. Uncle Richard's face flushed red, his hand dropping from her shoulder as if burned. I watched him struggle to maintain his composure, the vein in his temple pulsing visibly as he forced a tight smile. Well, he said finally, his voice strained. Youth often has unique perspectives. Miranda stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Perhaps we should move on to the family photographs now? The photographer is waiting in the garden. As the family began to disperse, Miranda paused beside me, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You really should teach your daughter some respect for her elders, though I suppose that would require you to have some yourself. I bit back the retort that sprung to my lips, unwilling to cause a scene with Elena watching. Instead, I turned away to find my daughter, who was still seated at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys absently. You played beautifully, I told her, sitting beside her on the bench. They don't like us very much, do they? Elena asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the piano. My heart constricted. I had hoped to shield her from the family's judgment, but Elena had always been perceptive. It's complicated, sweet pea. They have certain ideas about how things should be, and we don't quite fit those ideas. Because you decided to be an artist instead of a lawyer, or because you had me without being married? The bluntness of her question startled me. We had discussed her father before. She knew only that he hadn't been ready to be a parent, and that the decision had been mutual. I had never explicitly connected the family's disapproval to her existence. Both, I suppose, I answered honestly. But their disapproval says more about them than it does about us. Never forget that. Elena nodded slowly. Great-grandpa Marcus didn't disapprove, though, did he? That's why he left me the letter. No, he didn't, I confirmed. He loved us exactly as we are. She smiled slightly, her hand slipping into her pocket where I knew the letter waited. I don't think this is the moment yet, she said. When the family shows its true colors, they're still pretending to be nice. Mostly. Her insight was startling. At 12, she understood the layers of social performance better than I had at twice her age. Come on, I said, standing and offering her my hand. Let's go take this family photo, and then maybe explore some of those secret passageways I told you about. Outside, the family had assembled on the grand lawn, arranged in careful formations by the photographer. Oldest generation seated, middle generation standing behind them, youngest generation seated cross-legged in front. As newcomers, Elena and I were positioned at the far edge of the group, barely within the frame. Perhaps Ms. Olivia could move a bit further to the right? The photographer suggested delicately, though I was already at the edge of the group. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. The center should be family only. The implication that Elena and I weren't family hung in the air. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, but no one contradicted him. We are family, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the lawn. I have the Morrison eyes. Everyone says so. A few nervous titters broke out. Uncle Richard's expression darkened. Young lady? Richard, Aunt Joanna interrupted firmly. They are Morrisons. Elena is Marcus's great-granddaughter, same as your grandchildren. They belong in the center of the photo, not hidden at the edge as if we're ashamed. A tense silence followed. I could see the battle of wills playing out on my uncle's face. his desire to put us in our place warring with his awareness of how it would look to openly exclude his father's descendants. "Fine," he conceded finally. "Photographer, please rearrange accordingly." Elena and I were repositioned near the center, beside Uncle Peter's family. As we settled into place, I felt Elena's small hand slip into mine, squeezing tightly. "Smile." "Everyone!" the photographer called. 3, 2, 1! The flash went off, capturing a moment of forced harmony that bore little resemblance to reality. As soon as it was done, the carefully constructed tableau dissolved, with family members breaking off into smaller groups, most carefully avoiding Elena and me. "Well, that was pleasant," Aunt Joanna remarked dryly, joining us as the crowd dispersed. Richard always did have a talent for making people feel unwelcome in his father's house. "It's not his house," I pointed out. "Legally, it belongs to the Morrison family trust." "A fact he conveniently forgets," Joanna agreed. "Now, I believe someone was promised secret passageways. Why don't I show you both the library? The hidden door is still there, though it's a bit stiff these days." Elena's face lit up, the tension of the photo session forgotten in an instant. "The one that looks like a bookshelf? From Mom's stories?" "The very same," Joanna confirmed with a wink. "Coming, Olivia?" I glanced back at the scattered family groups on the lawn. No one seemed to notice or care about our departure. Absolutely. The library of Morrison Estate had always been my sanctuary as a child. A vast, 2-story room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs tucked into cozy nooks, and tall windows that filled the space with golden light. A spiral staircase in one corner led to a gallery that ran around the upper level, providing access to the highest shelves. Elena gasped as we entered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's even better than in your stories," she breathed. "Your great-grandfather spent most of his time in here," Joanna told her, running her hand along the spines of a row of leather-bound classics. "When Olivia was little, she would sit in that window seat for hours, reading while Marcus worked. At his desk." Elena drifted to the window seat in question, settling into it as if trying it on for size. "What did Great-Grandpa do? Mom always said he was important, but she never said exactly what he did." Joanna and I exchanged glances. "He was many things," I said carefully. "A businessman, primarily. He ran the family's timber company until it was sold in the 1990s. After that, he managed the family investments and served on several boards. He was also a historian," Joanna added. "He wrote 2 books on New England industrial development, but most importantly, he was the keeper of the family legacy. He believed that wealth and privilege carried responsibility, not just to maintain status, but to use resources wisely and compassionately." "Unlike some members of the current generation," I muttered, thinking of Uncle Richard's ostentatious displays of wealth and Miranda's casual cruelty. Elena was only half listening, her attention caught by the ornate wooden desk that dominated one end of the library. Was this his desk? Where he wrote his books? "Yes," Joanna confirmed. "And his letters. Marcus was a great believer in letter writing. Said it forced you to think carefully about your words." Elena's hand moved to her pocket, where the still unopened letter rested. "Like the one he wrote to me?" "Exactly like that," Joanna smiled. "Now, about that secret passage. Elena, do you see that bookshelf in the corner? The one with the Atlas collection? Try pulling on Geographic Survey of North America, Volume 3. With eager curiosity, Elena crossed to the indicated shelf and found the book in question. A large, green-bound volume. She tugged on it gently, then harder when nothing happened. Suddenly, with a soft click, the entire bookshelf shifted, swinging outward to reveal a narrow passage behind it. "It works!" Elena exclaimed delightedly. "Where does it go?" "To the East Wing," Joanna explained. "It was built during Prohibition as a way to access the wine cellar discreetly. Later, during World War II, the family used it to hide valuable artwork when they feared German bombing might reach the East Coast. Elena peered into the dim passage. Can we explore it? Not today, I'm afraid, Joanna said regretfully. It hasn't been maintained properly in years. Richard doesn't see the value in such nonsense, as he calls it. Elena's face fell momentarily, but her disappointment was quickly replaced by curiosity as she moved to examine the treasures displayed in glass cases around the room. First edition books, antique maps, and family artifacts collected over generations. What's this? She asked, pointing to a worn leather box. Ah, Joanna said, joining her. That's the original Morrison family Bible, brought over from Scotland in 1842. Open the case if you like. It's not locked. Carefully, Elena lifted the glass lid and peered at the ancient Bible. Its cover was cracked with age, the once bright gold lettering faded to a dull sheen. Can I touch it? Gently, Joanna nodded. With reverent hands, Elena opened the massive Bible to its center, where the family records were kept. Names, births, marriages, and deaths were recorded in different handwritings across centuries, an unbroken line of Morrisons stretching back nearly 200 years. Look, Mom, she said excitedly. Here's you, and here's me. She pointed to the last entries on the page, where our names were written in my grandfather's precise handwriting. I leaned closer, surprised. I hadn't known Marcus had added Elena to the family Bible. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. An official acknowledgement of her place in the Morrison lineage that not even Richard could erase. He added you the day after you were born, Joanna said softly. He was so proud, Olivia. He told everyone he met about his beautiful great-granddaughter. Tears pricked at my eyes. I had been so hurt by the family's rejection that I'd missed these quiet acts of acceptance from the man who had mattered most. Our moment of connection was interrupted by voices in the hallway outside the library. Miranda and her brother James, engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. Cannot believe you're even considering it, Miranda was saying as they entered the library. After everything that happened? After how she just walked away from the family? They both stopped short upon seeing us. James, at least, had the grace to look embarrassed. Oh, Miranda said coolly. We didn't realize anyone was in here. Just showing Elena some family history, Aunt Joanna replied pleasantly, as if she hadn't overheard their conversation. She's quite interested in her heritage. Miranda's gaze dropped to the open family Bible, her expression souring. I see. Well, don't let us interrupt your tour. James and I were just looking for a quiet place to discuss some family business. We were just leaving, I said, not wanting Elena to be subjected to more of Miranda's thinly veiled hostility. Elena, why don't we go find the conservatory? I told you about the glass dome, remember? Elena reluctantly closed the Bible, casting a longing look around the library as if trying to memorize every detail. Can we come back later? Of course you can, Joanna assured her. This house belongs to all Morrisons, after all. The pointed look she gave Miranda did not go unnoticed. As we left the library, I heard Miranda hiss to her brother, Did you see? He actually wrote that child into the family Bible, as if she belonged there. Elena's steps faltered, and I knew she had heard it too. Her face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. I placed a protective arm around her shoulders as we walked away. Don't listen to her, I whispered. I'm okay, Mom, she replied, though her voice was smaller than before. I'm used to people saying things. Her words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? What people? Elena shrugged. Kids at school sometimes, when they found out I don't have a dad. Or when they see you picking me up with paint in your hair instead of wearing business clothes like the other moms. She glanced up at me, her expression earnest. It's really okay. I know who I am. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, kneeling to meet her eyes. Elena Morrison, you listen to me. You are extraordinary, brilliant, kind, and braver than anyone I know. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I know. That's what Great-Grandpa Marcus always said in his letters." "His letters?" I repeated, confused. "You mean the one you have now?" "No, the ones he used to send me. On my birthday and Christmas, and sometimes just because. Didn't you know?" I shook my head, surprised. I knew he sent cards, but not letters. "He wrote to me a lot after I learned to read," Elena explained. "He said I was the future of the Morrison family, that I should never let anyone make me feel small because one day I would do great things." Fresh tears threatened at this revelation. My grandfather, always a man of few spoken words, had been writing to my daughter, encouraging her, preparing her for a world that might not always welcome her with open arms. It was exactly the kind of quiet, consistent support he had shown me in his own way. "I wish he was here today," Elena said softly. "He would know what to do." I straightened up, smoothing her curls. "Well, in a way, he is here. Through his letter to you. He must have known you might need his wisdom today." She nodded thoughtfully, her hand once again touching the pocket where the letter waited. "Not yet," she murmured, almost to herself. "But soon, I think." The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange dance of avoidance and forced politeness. We toured the conservatory with its magnificent glass dome, visited the portrait gallery where generations of stern-faced Morrisons gazed down from ornate frames, and strolled through gardens bursting with early summer blooms. Throughout it all, I was acutely aware of the undercurrents, the whispers that stopped when we approached, the speculative glances cast at Elena, the way certain family members steered their children away from her as if her status as a fatherless child might somehow be contagious. By late afternoon, a tension headache pounded behind my eyes, and I found myself counting the minutes until we could politely leave. Elena, too, seemed to be wilting under the constant scrutiny, her earlier excitement dimmed to a quiet watchfulness. "Just a little longer," I promised her as we took refuge on a secluded bench in the rose garden. "The dinner will be over by 8, and then we can go home." She nodded, leaning against my side. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "From your stories, it sounded like such a magical place." "It was once," I said, looking up at the imposing facade of the house. "Or maybe I just saw it that way because I was young. Everything seems more magical when you're a child." "Not everything," Elena said with unexpected wisdom. "Some things get clearer when you grow up. Like people. I can see things now that I wouldn't have noticed when I was little." Before I could respond, the dinner bell rang from the terrace, an old-fashioned signal that had been part of Morrison rituals for as long as I could remember. "That's our cue," I sighed, standing and brushing off my dress. "Centennial dinner. This is the main event of the reunion." "Will everyone be there?" Elena asked, a note of apprehension in her voice. "Everyone," I confirmed. "And it's likely to be tense." The centennial dinner is when family announcements are traditionally made. Births, engagements, major accomplishments, and changes to the family trust. Your great-grandfather always used to say you could measure the family's true state by counting the arguments at the centennial dinner. Elena's eyes widened. "Arguments? At dinner?" "Morrison arguments," I clarified with a wry smile. "Very civilized on the surface. Cutting remarks disguised as concern, critiques framed as helpful suggestions, backhanded compliments that leave bruises no one can see." "That sounds awful," Elena said bluntly. I laughed, surprising myself. "It is, rather, but we can handle it, can't we? We're Morrisons, after all. With courage and honor, right?" She straightened her shoulders, a determined look crossing her face. "Right. Courage and honor." Hand in hand, we walked back to the house, where the family was already gathering in the grand dining room. This time, the massive table had been extended to its full length, accommodating all 47 members of the Morrison clan currently in attendance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, fine china and silver gleamed at each place setting, and centerpieces of white roses and blue hydrangeas, the Morrison colors, stretched down the table's length. Again, Elena and I were seated near the middle, though this time Aunt Catherine had been placed beside Elena with Aunt Joanna on my other side. A strategic arrangement, I suspected, to buffer us from the most hostile family members. As servers poured wine and water, Uncle Richard rose from his place at the head of the table, raising his glass for a toast. His voice carried easily through the hushed room, practiced and polished as a politician's. "To the Morrison legacy," he began, echoing his lunchtime toast. 100 years of excellence, tradition, and commitment to the higher ideals upon which this family was founded. "The Morrison legacy," everyone repeated, raising their glasses. "As is our tradition at the centennial gathering," Richard continued, "we have several family announcements to make. First, I am pleased to announce that my son James has been appointed the new head of the Morrison Foundation, taking over from my brother Peter, who has served admirably for the past 15 years. Polite applause followed this announcement, though I noticed Peter's tight smile didn't reach his eyes. The foundation was the family's primary philanthropic vehicle, controlling substantial charitable donations and conferring significant social prestige on its head. Additionally, Richard went on, my daughter Miranda and her husband Christopher are expecting their second child in October, another future Morrison to carry our name forward. More applause, more congratulations. Miranda beamed, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. And finally, Richard's voice took on a more somber tone. I must address a matter of some delicacy. As many of you know, my father, Marcus Morrison, left certain provisions in his will regarding the family estate and trusts that were unconventional. A hush fell over the table. This, I suspected, was the real purpose of the centennial. Dinner, not to celebrate the family's history, but to reshape its future according to Richard's vision. For the past 5 years, we have honored these provisions out of respect for my father's memory. However, the trustees and I have concluded that certain adjustments must be made to ensure the continued prosperity and unity of the Morrison family. The dining room fell silent as Uncle Richard continued, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a man accustomed to delivering difficult news in palatable packages. My father stipulated that the Morrison estate should remain accessible to all family members, regardless of their chosen paths. His eyes flicked briefly toward me. He also designated certain trust funds that diverge from our traditional family practices. After careful consideration and consultation with our attorneys, we believe these provisions were made during a period when my father's judgment may have been compromised. A soft murmur rippled through the room. I felt my cheeks burn with indignation. Marcus had been sharp as a tack until his final days, a fact everyone at this table knew perfectly well. Therefore, Richard continued, his voice strengthening, the Board of Trustees has voted to contest these provisions. We believe the courts will agree that the Morrison legacy is best preserved by maintaining our established traditions of excellence and commitment to higher purposes. My hands trembled as I set down my water glass. I knew exactly what established traditions meant. It meant cutting off anyone who didn't conform to their narrow definition of success. It meant erasing Elena and me from the family narrative, just as they'd tried to position us at the edge of the family photograph. Aunt Joanna leaned closer to me, her voice a fierce whisper. He can't do this. Marcus's will was absolutely clear. Before I could respond, Uncle Peter spoke up from his place near the foot of the table. Richard, I must object. Father's mind was completely sound when he drafted his will. The provisions you're questioning were carefully considered and reflect his values, not any mental deterioration. Richard's smile tightened. Your loyalty to our father's memory is admirable, Peter. But as head of this family, I must consider what's best for the Morrison legacy as a whole. Diluting our resources and standards puts that legacy at risk. Diluting? Peter repeated incredulously. By including all of Marcus's descendants? By honoring his wishes to make the family estate? A genuine home for everyone who carries the Morrison name? By undermining the very principles upon which this family was built, Richard countered smoothly. Excellence, achievement, proper values. I could feel eyes shifting toward Elena and me. The implications were clear. We represented everything Richard believed threatened the Morrison legacy. A single mother who'd chosen art over law, a child born outside of marriage, the embodiment of what he saw as moral failure. Elena sat perfectly still beside me, her back straight, her expression composed. But I could see the tight grip she maintained on her napkin, the slight tremble of her lower lip. She understood exactly what was happening. I believe, Richard continued, raising his voice slightly to quell the murmurs around the table, that if Father had lived to see how certain situations have developed, he would have revised these provisions himself. That was when I heard the chair scrape beside me. Elena stood up, all 4 feet 11 inches of her, the dark blue eyes that marked her as a Morrison flashing with a determination I recognized all too well. My great-grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, she said, her clear voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining room. And he left me a letter to prove it. All eyes turned to her. I reached for her hand, but she stepped away, her chin lifted in a gesture so reminiscent of Marcus that my breath caught. Elena, I whispered. You don't have to. But she was. Already reaching into her pocket, withdrawing the sealed envelope that had rested there all day. The ivory paper was slightly creased from being carried, but Marcus's distinctive handwriting was clearly visible on the front. For Elena Morrison, to be opened when the family shows its true colors. I think this is the moment, Great-Grandpa. Marcus was talking about, she said, her voice steadier than mine would have been. When people try to change his wishes and pretend it's about mental deterioration instead of just not liking his decisions. A shocked silence fell over the table. No one, not even Richard, seemed to know how to respond to this small girl calling out the elaborate fiction they'd constructed. With careful fingers, Elena broke the seal on the envelope. The soft sound of tearing paper seemed unnaturally loud, in the hush. She unfolded the letter inside, several pages of heavy stationery covered in Marcus's neat handwriting, and took a deep breath. My dearest Elena, she read, her voice gaining strength with each word. If you're reading this, then the moment I feared has arrived. The family has shown its true nature, and you have recognized it for what it is. I could see Uncle Richard's face darkening, his fingers whitening around his water glass. But he didn't interrupt. None of them did. The name Marcus Morrison still commanded that much respect at least. I have watched you grow, Elena continued reading, from a curious baby into a remarkable young girl who questions everything, who sees clearly and who loves openly despite the judgment of others. These qualities make you more precious to me than any accolades or accomplishments that others in our family might claim. Her voice faltered briefly on these words, and I saw tears shimmering in her eyes. She blinked them away determinedly and continued. The Morrison legacy that your great-uncle Richard speaks of so reverently is not what he believes it to be. Our family motto, with courage and honor, has never been about achievements or status or appearing perfect in the eyes of society. True courage requires vulnerability. True honor demands integrity, even when it costs you something. Around the table, I saw varying reactions: discomfort, surprise, thoughtful consideration. Aunt Catherine was nodding slightly. Uncle Peter seemed to be fighting back tears. Even James, Richard's son, looked troubled. Your mother showed that courage when she chose to follow her heart instead of the path laid out for her. She displayed that honor when she raised you to be authentic rather than forcing you into the Morrison mold. For this, she has been judged harshly by those who mistake conformity for character. My throat tightened with emotion. All these years, I'd wondered if my grandfather had truly understood my choices or merely tolerated them. Now I had my answer. Let me tell you a truth that the current gatekeepers of the Morrison name would prefer to keep hidden, Elena read, her voice growing stronger. Your great-great-grandfather, August Morrison, who built this house and established our family's fortune, was born Anthony Morello, the son of Italian immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island with nothing but hope and determination. Gasps erupted around the table. Miranda's fork clattered against her plate. Richard's face had gone deathly pale. He changed his name, Elena continued, because the timber barons of New England wouldn't do business with Italians. He constructed an elaborate fiction about Scottish heritage to gain acceptance. The Morrison crest that adorns our silver and linens was designed by a Boston artist in 1925, not carried over from the old country as family legend claims. I stared in shock. The prestigious Morrison lineage, the very thing Richard and others clung to so desperately, was built on a carefully maintained lie. I discovered this truth in my 30s, Elena read, hidden in papers my grandfather had concealed in a locked drawer. I confronted my father, who admitted that every generation of Morrison men has been sworn to secrecy to protect the family's social position. I kept the secret too, I'm ashamed to say, allowing pride to overshadow honesty. The dining room had grown so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the foyer. Every face reflected stunned disbelief or dawning comprehension. But as I've grown older, I've come to believe that our true legacy lies not in the fiction we've maintained, but in the courage of Anthony Morello, who built something from nothing, who worked tirelessly to create opportunities for his children. His deception may have been necessary in the prejudiced world he inhabited, but our continued pretense is nothing but vanity. Elena turned the page, her young voice giving Marcus's words a poignancy that brought tears to my eyes. My final act as patriarch of this family is to end the lies. I have included the full documentation of our true origins in my will and legal papers. The Morrison name will continue, but it should stand for what Anthony Morello believed in: hard work, resilience, and creating a better future for those who come after us. Uncle Richard pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. This is preposterous, he sputtered. Father was clearly confused. These fabrications are completely accurate, Aunt Joanna interrupted firmly. I've seen the documents myself. Marcus showed them to me before he died. As have I, Uncle Peter added. The original immigration papers, Anthony Morello's diary, everything. It's all true, Richard. Richard looked stricken, as if the very foundation beneath his feet had crumbled away. Miranda was shaking her head in denial, while her husband stared fixedly at his plate, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. Elena, seemingly oblivious to the chaos she had unleashed, continued reading. Elena, my beloved great-granddaughter, I leave you with this truth because I believe you will understand its value. Our worth comes not from who our ancestors were or what society thinks of us, but from the courage with which we face life's challenges and the honor with which we treat others. She paused, looking up from the letter to sweep her gaze across the stunned faces around the table. In that moment, she looked far older than her 12 years. The provisions I have made in my will, ensuring that all Morrisons have access to the family estate, establishing trust funds for education regardless of chosen field, preserving artifacts of our true history. These are not signs of mental deterioration, but of moral clarity. I entrust you, Elena, with helping to build a Morrison legacy worthy of Anthony Morello's courage. One of authenticity, compassion, and genuine excellence rather than mere appearances. Elena carefully refolded the letter and looked directly at Uncle Richard. "There's more," she said quietly, "about specific legal provisions and evidence he left with his attorneys. But I think you get the point, Great Uncle Richard." The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. Then, like a dam breaking, everyone began speaking at once. Accusations, denials, questions flew across the table. A few people rose from their seats, gesturing emphatically. Miranda burst into tears while her twin sister Melanie stared into space with a stunned expression. In the midst of the chaos, Elena calmly returned to her seat beside me. She slipped her hand into mine beneath the table. "Are you okay?" I whispered, still trying to process everything I'd just heard. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Great-Grandpa Marcus said you'd ask me that. The last part of the letter was just for me. He said to tell you that he was prouder of you than anyone else in the family, because you never needed the Morrison name to know your own worth." Fresh tears sprang to my eyes. Even now, 5 years after his death, my grandfather was still finding ways to offer the quiet, steadfast support that had been his hallmark. The pandemonium around the table was beginning to organize itself into distinct factions. Richard, Miranda, and a few others had moved to a corner of the room, speaking in urgent whispers. Uncle Peter had raised his voice, insisting that Marcus's will must be honored in its entirety. Younger cousins were tapping frantically on their phones, perhaps searching for any public records that might confirm or deny the revolutionary claims. Aunt Catherine made her way to our side of the table, slipping into an empty chair beside Elena. "Well," she said, with remarkable composure, "you certainly know how to liven up a family dinner, my dear." Elena blushed slightly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. But Great-Grandpa's letter said it was important for everyone to know the truth." Catherine patted her hand gently. "Marcus always did believe that truth was the ultimate act of courage. I suspect he would be delighted by the chaos you've unleashed in his name." Her eyes twinkled with something that looked suspiciously like approval. "Did you know?" I asked her quietly. "About Anthony Morello?" She shook her head. "Not the specifics, but I always suspected there was something. Marcus became very interested in genealogy in his later years, and he seemed troubled by what he found. Now I understand why." Across the room, Uncle Richard's voice rose above the din. "This changes nothing. Whether our ancestor was named Morrison or Morello, this family has built a legacy of excellence and distinction. We will not abandon our standards or dilute our resources based on some misplaced sentimentality." Uncle Peter stepped toward him, his normally gentle face flushed with anger. "This isn't about sentimentality, Richard. It's about honoring Marcus's wishes as the rightful patriarch. It's about acknowledging that our family's true strength comes from including all Morrisons, not just those who fit your narrow definition of success." The two brothers faced each other like combatants, decades of simmering disagreement finally boiling over. Around them, family members began to take sides, voices rising in support of one position or the other. Aunt Joanna appeared at my elbow, her expression concerned. "Perhaps you and Elena should step out for a bit," she suggested quietly. "This may get uglier before it gets better." I nodded, grateful for her foresight. "Come on, sweet pea," I murmured to Elena. "Let's get some air." We slipped out through the French doors onto the terrace, leaving the heated debate behind us. The evening air was cool and fragrant with roses, a welcome respite from the tension inside. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the garden lamps had come on, casting pools of golden light across the paths and flower beds. Elena leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the gardens. "I didn't expect everyone to get so upset," she said thoughtfully. "It doesn't really change who we are, does it? Finding out that our great-great-great-grandfather came From Italy instead of Scotland? It changes the story they've told themselves, I replied, joining her at the railing. For people like Richard and Miranda, that story is everything. It justifies their sense of superiority, their belief that the Morrison name makes them special. But it doesn't, Elena said with the straightforward clarity of childhood. What makes people special is what they do and how they treat others. That's what Great-Grandpa Marcus wrote in all his letters to me. I smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Your great-grandfather was a wise man. He also said that you were the bravest Morrison he'd ever known, she added, leaning against me. Because you weren't afraid to be yourself, even when everyone else wanted you to be someone different. My heart swelled at these words, at the knowledge that Marcus had not only accepted my choices but admired them. For years, I'd carried the weight of what I perceived as his disappointment, never realizing that behind his reserved exterior had been profound respect. I wasn't always brave, I admitted. There were times I almost gave in, almost came back, and did what they wanted, just to feel like I belonged again. Why didn't you? I looked down at her upturned face, those Morrison blue eyes that held such intelligence and curiosity. Because of you, I said simply. I wanted you to grow up knowing that it's more important to be true to yourself than to please others. That your worth isn't determined by anyone's approval. She smiled, a smile so like my grandfather's that it made my chest ache. Well, it worked, and now we know Great-Grandpa felt the same way. Behind us, the voices from the dining room had grown louder, spilling out onto the terrace. I turned to see Uncle Peter emerge through the French doors, his expression troubled, but determined. Olivia, he called, spotting us by the railing. The family is taking a vote on how to proceed regarding Marcus's will and the revelations in his letter. You should be present. I hesitated, looking at Elena. I'm not sure that's the best environment for— I want to stay, Elena interrupted firmly. Great-Grandpa's letter was addressed to me. I should be there when they decide what to do about it. Uncle Peter smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. She has the Morrison backbone, that's for certain, or should I say the Morello determination. The three of us returned to the dining room, where the family had reorganized themselves around the table. The heated chaos had settled into tense order, with Richard once again at the head, though his usual commanding presence seemed diminished. Ah, Olivia, Elena, he acknowledged our return with stiff formality. We were just discussing the unexpected information that has come to light. The family is divided on how to proceed. There's nothing to discuss, Aunt Joanna said firmly. Marcus's will is legally binding. His provisions regarding the estate and trust must be honored, regardless of anyone's feelings about them. Richard's jaw tightened. Legal documents can be challenged if there's evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. There was neither, Uncle Peter cut in. And you know it, Richard. Marcus was of sound mind until the end, and these provisions reflect views he held throughout his life about family inclusion and supporting diverse paths. The question, Richard pressed on, ignoring his brother, is whether we want to preserve the Morrison legacy as it has existed for generations or redefine it based on these new claims. They're not claims, they're facts, Elena said clearly, her young voice carrying through the room. And Great-Grandpa Marcus thought our real legacy should be courage and authenticity, not pretending to be something we're not. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. I saw several of the younger cousins nodding in agreement, while some of the older generation looked uncomfortable. Richard glared at Elena, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged by a child. Young lady, you cannot possibly understand the complexities of this situation. I understand that you're trying to change Great-Grandpa's wishes because you don't like them, Elena replied evenly. And you're using fancy words to make it sound like you're doing it for the family when really you're doing it for yourself. A shocked silence fell. Then, surprisingly, Uncle James, Richard's own son, laughed. "She's got you there, Dad," he said, shaking his head. "And she's right. We're not voting on whether to honor Marcus's will. We're voting on whether we want to be the kind of family that values appearances over truth." Richard's face flushed. Deep red. "James, you cannot seriously be suggesting—" "I am," James interrupted firmly. "I move that we accept Marcus's provisions in full, acknowledge our true family history, and commit to building a Morrison legacy based on inclusion rather than exclusion." "I second the motion," Aunt Catherine said immediately. "This is absurd," Miranda protested. "We can't make such a significant decision based on a letter read by a child and the romantic notions of—" "All in favor?" Uncle Peter called out, effectively cutting off Miranda's objections. Hands rose around the table, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Uncle Peter, Aunt Joanna, and Aunt Catherine had their hands raised high. James raised his, followed by his wife, Cousin Thomas, then his brother Michael, the twins' husbands, several of the younger generation, more and more hands, until it became clear that the majority stood with Marcus's vision. Richard's face drained of color as he watched the sea of raised hands. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, the patriarch of the Morrison family found himself outvoted, outmaneuvered by a 12-year-old girl with a letter and the truth it contained. "This is not a legally binding vote," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he could see that the family's sentiment had shifted decisively. "No," Uncle Peter agreed calmly, "but it is a statement of family values. And it seems the family has spoken clearly, Richard." Miranda pushed back from the table abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're all being manipulated by sentiment and—" "By the truth," Elena interjected quietly. "Great-Grandpa Marcus wanted us to know who we really are." Miranda glared at her, then at me. "This is your doing," she hissed. "You've never respected our traditions, our standards." "I've never respected pretense," I corrected her. "There's a difference." Aunt Catherine cleared her throat delicately. "I believe we should adjourn for the evening. It's been rather a lot to process for everyone. Perhaps in the morning, cooler heads will prevail, and we can discuss the practical implications of honoring Marcus's wishes without further drama." Richard nodded stiffly, recognizing the wisdom in this suggestion, if not its implicit criticism of his leadership. "Very well. This dinner is adjourned. We will reconvene tomorrow at 10 to discuss next steps." As the family began to disperse, an air of stunned disbelief lingered. Some moved in small clusters, whispering intently. Others looked shell-shocked, as if the foundations of their identity had been shaken beyond repair. In a way, they had. Elena and I remained seated, neither of us quite ready to navigate the gauntlet of stares and whispers that awaited us outside the dining room. Aunt Joanna stayed with us, as did Uncle Peter and Aunt Catherine. A protective circle of sorts, though. I wasn't entirely sure who was protecting whom. "You were magnificent," Aunt Catherine told Elena, genuine admiration in her voice. "Marcus would have been so proud." Elena blushed slightly. "I was scared," she admitted. "But Great-Grandpa wrote in his letter that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you are afraid." "Wise words," Uncle Peter said, glancing toward the doorway where Richard had disappeared. "And truer to the real Morrison or Morello spirit than all of Richard's speeches about legacy and excellence." "What happens now?" I asked finally, voicing the question that had been hovering in my mind since Elena first read the letter. "Practically speaking, I mean." Aunt Joanna patted my hand. "Now we honor Marcus's wishes, as we should have been doing all along. The estate remains open to all family members. The educational trusts remain available regardless of chosen field. And most importantly," she added with a significant look at Elena, "we acknowledge our true history, with all its complexity." It won't be easy, Uncle Peter warned. Richard won't give up without a fight. He has too much invested in the narrative. He's constructed. Let him fight, Aunt Catherine said with unexpected steel in her voice. The truth is on our side, and it's past time this family learned that worth isn't measured by pedigree or profession. Elena yawned suddenly, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Despite the momentous revelations and family drama, she was still a 12-year-old who had been through an emotionally exhausting day. I think it's time we headed home, I said, placing an arm around her shoulders. It's been quite a day. You're not staying the night? Aunt Joanna asked, surprised. We've prepared rooms for everyone. I shook my head. I think we've given the family enough to digest for one day. We'll come back tomorrow for the morning meeting. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, family members approached us one by one, some to express support, others simply to look at Elena with new eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. James caught me by the elbow as we headed for the door. I wanted to say, he began awkwardly. That is, I've always thought the way the family treated you was wrong. I should have said something sooner. I studied his face, so like Richard's, in features, yet softer somehow, less hardened by certainty. Why didn't you? He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed decades of complicated family dynamics. Fear, I suppose, of disappointing my father, of disrupting the peace, of being excluded, myself. He glanced at Elena, who was waiting by the door with Aunt Joanna. But your daughter reminded me that courage means doing what's right, even when it's difficult. I nodded, understanding all too well the power of that fear. It's never too late to choose courage, James. I hope not, he replied quietly. The drive home was quiet, with Elena drifting in and out of sleep beside me. The events of the day played through my mind like scenes from a surreal film. The family's initial coldness, Elena at the piano, the revelation of Marcus's letter, the stunned faces around the dinner table as generations of carefully maintained fiction crumbled. Mom? Elena murmured, half asleep as we pulled into our driveway. Do you think things will be different now? I turned off the engine, considering her question. Yes, I said finally. Not immediately and not completely. But yes, things will be different. Good different or bad different? Good different, I assured her, smoothing back her curls. Any time truth replaces pretense, it's good different. She smiled sleepily. That's what Great-Grandpa said would happen, that the truth might hurt at first, but it would heal us better than any comfortable lie. Once again, I marveled at the bond my grandfather had formed with my daughter through his letters, a connection I hadn't fully appreciated until today. In his quiet, deliberate way, Marcus had been preparing Elena for this moment, equipping her with the wisdom and courage she would need to face the family's judgment. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect New England summer day. Elena was unusually quiet as we prepared to return to the Morrison estate, her normal exuberance tempered by the weight of yesterday's events. Having second thoughts? I asked gently as we got into the car. She shook her head. No. But I was thinking about what Great-Grandpa wrote about our real ancestor, Anthony Morello, about how brave he must have been to leave Italy and come to America with nothing, and then to work so hard and build something for his family, even if he had to hide who he really was. That was a different time, I reminded her. Italian immigrants faced terrible discrimination then. I know, she replied thoughtfully. But Great-Grandpa Marcus said the really sad part wasn't that Anthony had to change his name back then. It was that we kept hiding the truth even after. It didn't matter anymore, just because we were afraid of not seeming special enough. The insight took my breath away. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. That's exactly right, I said. We clung to a fiction because it was more flattering than the truth. But the truth is better, Elena insisted. Anthony Morello worked super hard and built everything from nothing. That's way more impressive than just inheriting stuff from fancy Scottish ancestors. I smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. When did you get so wise? From great-grandpa's letters, she said, simply. And from you, Mom. You always told me that who I am is more important than what other people think of me. As we turned onto the long driveway leading to the Morrison estate, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For so many years, this place had represented judgment and rejection, the embodiment of standards I could never meet, and traditions I could never fully embrace. But seeing it through Elena's eyes, and now, through the lens of Marcus's revelations, I recognized it as something else entirely, a legacy more complex and more authentic than the sanitized version Richard had tried to maintain. The circular drive was less crowded than yesterday, though still dotted with the cars of family members who had stayed overnight. As we parked and walked toward the front entrance, I noticed subtle changes that reflected the previous evening's upheaval. The large banner with the family crest had been taken down. The young woman who had checked us in yesterday was nowhere to be seen. The formal atmosphere had given way to something more subdued, more contemplative. Inside the grand foyer, family members stood in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent as we entered. All eyes turned toward Elena, some curious, some wary, some openly admiring. She straightened her shoulders under their scrutiny, her posture echoing the quiet dignity I'd seen in my grandfather countless times. Aunt Joanna hurried to greet us, relief evident in her face. I was worried you might change your minds about coming, she admitted, embracing us both. We considered it, I replied honestly, but running away wouldn't solve anything. Besides, Elena added, Great-Grandpa's letter said I should help build a better kind of Morrison legacy. I can't do that if we don't come back. Aunt Joanna smiled, her eyes suspiciously bright. Marcus chose his messenger well, she said softly. She led us to the library, which had been arranged for the morning's meeting. The formal dining setup had been replaced by a more casual arrangement of chairs in a rough circle. Most of the family was already assembled, though notably absent were Richard, Miranda, and a few others who had been most vocal in their opposition the night before. Richard called earlier, Uncle Peter explained as we found seats. He and Miranda have decided to remove themselves from this farce, as he put it. They've returned to the city. Does that mean they're not going to fight the will? I asked, surprised by this apparent surrender. Peter shook his head. No, it means they're consulting their attorneys. This isn't over, Olivia. But their absence does give us an opportunity to have a more productive conversation about how we move forward as a family. The meeting began without the formal protocol that usually characterized Morrison gatherings. Instead, Uncle Peter simply stood and addressed the assembled family in his straightforward manner. We've all had a night to process the revelations that came to light at dinner, he began. I think it's important that we acknowledge the significance of what we've learned, not just about our ancestry, but about the values that should guide us as a family. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I was struck by how different the energy felt without Richard's domineering presence, lighter somehow, more open. Marcus left explicit instructions about his wishes for the family moving forward, Peter continued, but beyond the legal provisions of his will, he clearly hoped to inspire a shift in how we define ourselves and our legacy. I believe we should honor that intention by having an honest conversation about what kind of family we want to be. What followed was unlike any Morrison family discussion I had ever witnessed. One by one, family members spoke, not about status, or achievements or maintaining appearances, but about genuine connection, about the toll that perfectionism had taken on their lives, about their relief at finally understanding why Marcus had seemed to grow distant from family traditions in his later years. Cousin Thomas, a successful surgeon who had always seemed to embody the Morrison ideal, confessed that he had struggled with depression for years, afraid to seek help lest it be seen as weakness. "The pressure to be perfect nearly destroyed me," he said quietly. "I don't want that for my children." Aunt Elizabeth, who had been so critical of Elena's piano playing, admitted that she had abandoned her dream of becoming a composer decades ago because it wasn't considered a suitable ambition for a Morrison woman. "I've regretted it every day," she said, her voice breaking. "When I heard Elena play yesterday with such genuine feeling, it reminded me of what I gave up out of fear." Even Melanie, Miranda's twin, spoke up hesitantly. "I've always envied you, Olivia," she admitted. "Not your circumstances, but your courage to walk away from expectations that didn't fit who you really are. I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect Morrison daughter, and I'm not sure I even know who I am beneath that role." As I listened to these confessions, these tentative steps toward authenticity, I felt a profound shift taking place. Not just in how the family saw Elena and me, but in how they understood themselves. Marcus's revelation had cracked the facade they had maintained for generations, allowing glimpses of their true selves to emerge. Elena sat beside me, listening intently to each speaker, occasionally nodding as if confirming something she already understood. When Uncle Peter asked if anyone else wished to speak, she raised her hand. "I think Great-Grandpa Marcus would be really happy right now," she said, her young voice clear and confident. "Not because everyone's upset or confused, but because you're all being real with each other maybe for the first time." She pulled out her great-grandfather's letter again, turning to the final page. "He wrote something here that I think everyone should hear. The greatest tragedy of the Morrison family has not been our hidden origins, but our willingness to sacrifice authenticity for the approval of others. We have measured success by external standards rather than by the courage to be fully ourselves. If my death can purchase your freedom from these chains, then I consider it a price well paid." A profound silence followed these words. I saw tears on several faces, including my own. Marcus had understood, better than any of us, the prison we had constructed for ourselves out of pride and fear. "So what do we do now?" James asked finally, giving voice to the question on everyone's mind. "We begin again," Aunt Catherine said, firmly. "We acknowledge our true history, with all its complexity. We honor Marcus's vision for a more inclusive family culture. And most importantly, we give each other permission to be imperfect, to follow different paths, to define success on our own terms." "That sounds wonderful in theory," Cousin Philip objected. "But practically speaking, how do we implement such a dramatic shift? The Morrison or Morello identity has been defined in specific ways for generations. You can't just change that overnight." "No, you can't," I agreed, speaking up for the first time. "But you can take the first step, and then another, the same way Anthony Morello did when he arrived in this country with nothing but hope and determination. The same way each of us does whenever we choose authenticity over pretense." Elena nodded vigorously beside me. "Great-grandpa said change happens one brave choice at a time." The conversation continued for hours, meandering through practical considerations about the estate and trust, broader questions about family identity, and personal reflections on what this new understanding meant for individual lives. Not everyone embraced the vision with equal enthusiasm. There were skeptics and holdouts, those who worried about what others would think if the truth about Anthony Morello became widely known. But the momentum had shifted decisively toward honesty and inclusion. By early afternoon, concrete decisions had been made. A family committee would be formed to implement Marcus's provisions regarding the estate and educational trusts. The true story of Anthony Morello would be documented and shared with all family members. And perhaps most significantly, the annual Morrison retreats would be restructured to celebrate diverse paths and achievements, rather than focusing exclusively on traditional markers of success. As the meeting drew to a close, Aunt Joanna approached with a small wooden box I hadn't seen before. "Marcus wanted Elena to have this," she said, placing it in my daughter's hands. "He said she would know when the time was right to open it." Elena studied the box curiously, running her fingers over the smooth, polished surface and the small brass latch that held it closed. "Can I open it now?" she asked, looking up at Joanna. "I think this is exactly the right moment," Joanna replied with a smile. With careful fingers, Elena lifted the latch and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a gold pocket watch with the Morrison, or rather the Morello, crest engraved on its cover. "It belonged to Anthony," Joanna explained softly. "It's been passed down through the generations, from father to son, along with the secret of our true origins. Marcus was the last to receive it, and he wanted it to go to you, Elena." "But I'm not a son," Elena pointed out, though her eyes never left the watch. "No," Joanna agreed. "You're something much more valuable. A truth-teller. Marcus believed that was worth far more than adhering to tradition for tradition's sake." Elena lifted the watch reverently from its velvet nest, turning it over in her palm. On the back, an inscription was engraved in flowing script, "Con coraggio e onore," with "courage and honor" in Italian rather than Latin. The original family motto, Joanna explained. Anthony had it inscribed when he achieved his first major success in the timber industry. The Latin version came later, part of the Scottish fiction he constructed. "It's the same words," Elena observed, "just in the real language of our family." "Yes," Joanna nodded. "The values remained true, even when the story around them changed." Elena carefully returned the watch to its box, her expression solemn. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. "And someday I'll pass it on to someone who understands what it really means." As we prepared to leave the estate that afternoon, the atmosphere had transformed from the tense formality of our arrival to something warmer, more authentic. Family members who had barely acknowledged us the day before now sought us out to express gratitude, share memories of Marcus, or simply to connect with the child who had catalyzed such profound change. Uncle Peter walked us to our car, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, "Marcus told me once that he saw more of the original Morello spirit in you, Olivia, than in anyone else in the family. She has Anthony's resilience," he said, "his refusal to be limited by other people's expectations. I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. Now I do." I blinked back tears, unprepared for this glimpse of how my grandfather had perceived me. All those years I had interpreted his reserve as disappointment, never imagining that he had seen me as the standard bearer of our family's truest values. "And as for you," Peter continued, crouching to meet Elena at eye level, "Marcus knew exactly what he was doing when he entrusted you with that letter. You have both your mother's courage and his clear-eyed wisdom. The future of this family is in good hands." As we drove away from the Morrison estate, Elena was uncharacteristically quiet, gazing out the window at the grand house receding in the distance. "Penny, for your thoughts," I prompted gently. She turned to me, her expression contemplative. "I was just thinking about Anthony Morello, about how he probably never imagined that his great-great-great-granddaughter would someday read his watch and know his real name and be proud of him instead of hiding who he was." "I'm sure he didn't," I agreed. "Just like I never imagined my grandfather had left you a letter that would change the course of the entire family." "Do you think it really will change things?" she asked, doubt creeping into her voice for the first time. "Uncle Richard and Cousin Miranda are still really mad, and some of the others didn't seem totally convinced." I considered her question carefully, wanting to be honest without diminishing the significance of what had occurred. "I think change is rarely complete or immediate," I said finally. "There will be resistance and setbacks. Richard and Miranda may never fully embrace this new vision. But yes, I believe something fundamental has shifted. You helped the family see itself clearly, perhaps for the first time in generations. That kind of awareness can't be undone. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assessment. After a moment, she asked, "Mom, what do you think Great-Grandpa Marcus would say if he could see what happened this weekend?" I smiled, picturing my grandfather's face, stern on the surface, but with that telltale twinkle in his Morrison blue eyes that appeared whenever he was quietly pleased. I think he would say that courage and honor have many faces and forms, that sometimes the bravest thing isn't grand actions, but small moments of truth, and that a legacy built on authenticity will outlast any built on appearances. Elena leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice sleepy but content. I think so too. And I think he'd be really proud of us, both of us. As we drove home, through the golden afternoon light, the weight I had carried for so many years, the sense of being judged and found wanting, of never quite belonging, began to lift. In its place grew something new. Not pride, exactly, but a quiet certainty that Elena and I were exactly who we were meant to be. Not despite our differences from the traditional Morrison mold, but because of them. My grandfather had understood this truth long before any of us. In his own careful, deliberate way, he had planted seeds of transformation. In his will, in his letter to Elena, in the careful documentation of our true origins. And now those seeds were beginning to grow, nurtured by the courage of a 12-year-old girl who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. The Morrison family, the Morello family, would never be the same. And that, I realized with growing certainty, was exactly what Marcus had intended all along. "Mom," Elena murmured, half asleep against my shoulder. "I'm glad Great-Grandpa gave me that letter." "So am I, sweet pea," I replied softly. "So am I." In the days and weeks that followed, the ripples from that remarkable weekend continued to spread outward. Richard did indeed consult his attorneys, but found little legal ground to contest provisions that had been so carefully documented by Marcus. The Morrison estate began its transformation into the more welcoming space my grandfather had envisioned, with family members from all branches, visiting more frequently, bringing their diverse talents and perspectives. Elena's watch became her most treasured possession. She kept it on her nightstand, and I sometimes found her studying the Italian inscription, tracing the words with her finger as if absorbing their meaning through touch. Con coraggio e onore, with courage and honor, not as abstract family virtues, to be invoked in speeches, but as living principles to be embodied in daily choices. One evening, as summer waned toward autumn, I found her sitting cross-legged on her bed, writing intently in a leather-bound journal I didn't recognize. "What's that, sweet pea?" I asked, sitting beside her. She looked up with a smile that reminded me powerfully of Marcus. "I decided to start writing letters," she explained, "like Great-Grandpa did, to the future Morrisons who might need to be reminded of who we really are." "That's a wonderful idea," I said, touched by her desire to continue Marcus's legacy of quiet guidance. "What are you telling them?" Elena considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "That family isn't about being perfect or important or the same as everyone else. It's about accepting people for who they really are, and being brave enough to be yourself even when it's hard. And that sometimes," she added with a wisdom beyond her years, "the most important legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you help others discover within themselves." As I listened to my daughter articulate these profound truths she had learned partly from Marcus, partly from our own journey, and partly from her own innate wisdom, I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. The Morrison legacy was indeed being transformed, not through grand declarations or sweeping changes, but through small acts of courage and authenticity. through letters written with love and read at just the right moment, through a child's willingness to speak truth to power, through a family's gradual awakening to the reality that their greatest strength lay not in the fiction they had maintained, but in the authentic connections they were now beginning to forge. With courage and honor, con coraggio e onore. Not just words on a family crest or a pocket watch, but a living philosophy that had survived generations of secrecy to emerge, finally, into the light. Thanks to Marcus's foresight and Elena's courage, the true Morrison legacy would continue, stronger and more authentic than ever before. And that, I realized as I watched my daughter continue her writing, her face illuminated by the warm glow of her bedside lamp, was a legacy worth passing on. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.